All right, so let's take a few moments to talk about the Vlookup function. Now, the Vlookup function stands for vertical lookup, and that's all to do with this, essentially how your table array is set up. This table array is set up in columns, vertical columns, so essentially the function that we'd be using would be called a Vlookup. Now, let's explain what we want this to do. Essentially, I want a function or formula that's going to take a look at the total sales for the salesperson. In this case, let's say an example of Fred, and they've sold 1,500. I wanted to take that lookup value, go over into my table array, and match it up with a corresponding percent. So I want to go, okay, that's 1,500. That means that's 7%. I wanted to take that 7% and put it in as the result of this formula. Now, in order to do that, we need to use these lookup functions. In this case, a Vlookup, again, because our table is set up vertically. So I'm going to start it off by typing Vlookup open bracket. Now, there's quite a few pieces to this particular function. We have a lookup value, table array, column index number, as well as an optional component called range lookup. So instead of just typing this one in, we're going to go into a little bit more detail. I'm going to click on the insert function button at this point. That's going to pop up all my different options. So lookup value, that's the value that you want this formula and function to look at. And that happens to be the total sales for the particular salesperson. So that is in cell E5. There we go. Now what I wanted to do is I wanted to take that lookup value and then go compare it in my table. So that's the next component here called the table array. That is the range of your table. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use my mouse to do this one. I'm going to click this little button, and I'm going to move this window out of the way, and then I'm just going to select the table range there, click that same button, and it brings me back in. So my table array is from H2 to I12. You'll notice an important thing I did there was I did not include headings. Other things about the table, it does have to be sorted in ascending order based on the first column, which of course you can see it is. And the other thing, depending on the type of table you have and whether or not you want it to shift and move with this formula, we need to think about absolute references. So for example, when I copy this formula down to the next salesperson, the next salesperson, the next salesperson, because I don't want to have to reinsert this function. When I copy it down, Excel is going to shift everything down. So the next one's going to read E6, and then it's going to read H3 to I13, and that's no good for me. The table is always in the same spot. So what I need to do is I need to make this an absolute reference. I'm just going to highlight it and then hit my F4 key, and that's going to put in the dollar signs for me. If you want more information about absolute referencing, please go look up our Excel videos that we have on that if you wanted more information about what these dollar signs are doing. The next piece here is the column index number. Your table array in this particular example has two columns, and we always read it from left to right. So it has column 1, which would be the amount, and column 2, which would be the percent. So this column index number is asking you what column do you want to return as the result. So do I want to return column 1 as a result or column 2 as the result? Well, we already said that this is the bonus column. So what I want in here is the percent, and the percent is in column 2. So my column index number, I'm simply going to type in 2. This range lookup is optional. Okay, if you leave it blank, it's the same as saying true, or if you want to find an exact match, you can put it and set it to false. Now what that means, okay, by default, if it does not find the exact value, so for this first one, it's going to work just fine. 1,500 has an exact match in the table of 1,500, so we'll get 7%. This next one has 1,570. That value is not actually in my table. So if I were to leave this at true or blank, it will find the closest match and then return, in this case, 7%. If you don't want that, if you want it to always find an exact match in the table, if it doesn't find an exact match, it will return back false. You would need to set this range lookup to false, so you can simply type in false there, use a 0 or a 1, based on whether you want to set it to true or false. So I'm just going to leave that as blank or true, and I'm going to hit OK. You'll notice it puts in 7%. It found the 1,500. There it is. Grab the 7%, put it in. If I fill this down, it will work for all of the other ones. Again, because I left that range lookup as blank, it finds the closest match. So 1,570, it found 1,500, returned 7%, and so on and so forth. So using these Vlookup functions to compare values against a table is extremely useful in Excel, and they're not that hard to insert into your spreadsheets.